Half a day, the Committee on Health, Tourism, Historic Preservation, Land, and Justice is now called to order. Today's Monday, June 29, 2020. The time is 2:02 p.m. Notices for this public hearing were disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on Monday, June 22, and again on Friday, June 26, 2020. The notice was also published in the Guam Daily Post on Monday, June 8 and Thursday, June 11, 2020. This Zoom meeting is co-hosted by the legislature's MIS staff, and I thank them for their assistance. The host of this hearing will mute all Zoom participants until called upon by the chair. Members of the committee or the legislature wishing to speak may indicate their desire to the chair through the in-app chat feature. Each member will be allowed to pose a question to an individual for one round and will be provided another round if needed. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Any violations of this general rule of conduct will result in removal from the public hearing by the host. We have two items on our agenda today, two bills. One bill is Bill 344-35 by Senator Luis Muña. It's relative to prohibiting the seizure by government officials of a patient's mail order prescription medications, equipment, supplies, and appliances. We also have Bill number 338-35, sponsored by Senator Jim Moylan, which is relative to enhancing transparency during a state of a public health emergency. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my colleagues. Thank you very much for being here. Senator James Moylan, Senator Kelly Marsh-Taitano, Senator Luis Muña, Minority Leader Senator Terlaje. Thank you, senators. We'll begin now with the first item on the agenda, and I'd ask the sponsor, Senator Luis Muña, to please introduce the bill, including the full title. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you very much for allowing me to bring this bill to the public's attention and get some input. This is bill number 344-35 LS, an act to add a new subsection 19501.1 to Chapter 19, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, relative to prohibiting the seizure by government officials of patients' mail order prescription medications, equipment, supplies, and appliances. Madam Chair, I believe this is unthinkable and cruel that an agency of a government of Guam can seize someone's prescription drugs. Patients pay for medicine either directly or through their insurance companies to treat medical issues or illnesses. Under current law, the government of Guam can seize any medication, appliance, supplies, or machines from the patient to whom it is prescribed for and use it on other patients. Linda Ampinko DeNorcy's letter states below, dated April 8, 2020, DPHSS Guidance Memo 2020-06, mandatory customs declaration regarding the importation of items related to COVID-19. And the body reads this: the Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency is hereby authorized to require the affirmative declaration of any importation of in vitro diagnostic tests, personal protective equipment, PPEs, medical devices and supplies, antitoxins, serums, vaccines, immunizing agents, antibiotics, or other pharmaceutical agents and or ventilators. The exercise of this authority is imperative due to the need to ration supplies for the purpose of responding to the public health emergency, as well as to prevent the importation of counterfeit items. This guidance memo was signed by Linda Ampinko DeNorcy, the director. Madam Chair, this bill will prevent any GovGuam official from confiscating patients' legally prescribed drugs, CPAP machines, nebulizers, and supplies. The government of Guam should not be allowed to ration pharmaceutical agents or anything else that was lawfully prescribed to and paid for by the patients. Madam Chair, my mom is also a CPAP patient, and she also receives some of her supplies through the mail. And I can't imagine that any of those, any of her supplies would be taken away from her that could jeopardize her health as well. And so that's one of the reasons why this bill is very important to me, and I hope as well to the patients. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Munya. There's no one else currently signed up to testify, but if I could state for the record, we did request feedback on the bill from the Director of Customs and Quarantine and the Division of Environmental Health at the Department of Public Health and Social Services. We are waiting for reply. We've also requested a legal review, which we have received today. And we have received a fiscal note from BBMR, which says that the bill is administrative in nature and thus they claim no fiscal impact. As to the legal review, it points out, and so I'm taking excerpts from it now, that the provision would potentially waive applicable local laws regulating the importation of drugs, prescription or otherwise, such as the Guam Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, 10 GCA 40101 through 40129. With regard to chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine specifically, prescribing the seizure of these drugs may be problematic due to federal regulation of the drugs, federal preemption of local laws, and overall health and safety concerning consumer use and recent findings by the Food and Drug Administration. So she says that she talks about the history of the hydrochloroquine in particular and its license or its approval by FDA and then the EUA for COVID purposes having been revoked. So I'll begin there again. On July 15, 2020, the FDA revoked the EUA for CQ and HCQ, which is chloroquine and hydrochloroquine, based on new information, concluding that it is no longer reasonable to believe that oral formulations, blah, 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 I'm going to go to the end. As a result of the revocation, the oral formulations of HCQ and CQ are no longer authorized by the FDA to treat COVID-19. Significant distinctions remain, this is legal now, significant distinctions remain regarding how the drugs under EUA approval are now regulated versus FDA approved HCQ. And she goes into particular and then says, thus, while the importation of prescribed HCQ for the treatment of, say, lupus remains lawful, the importation of CQ products covered by the EUA for any indication is not. And the provisions of the bill in direct conflict with the regulation of these drugs would be preempted by federal regulation. I think this is just one example of a federal regulation of certain particular drugs that we may need to just take into account on this bill. But I certainly understand the intent of the sponsor. And if I could just ask, if there is, I read in the media, they wrote stories about public health's memo or their guidelines and their directive to customs, but were there any incidences that you know of where they actually confiscated items, as particularly medications?
Madam Chair, was that question directed towards me?
I think so, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I would have liked to have maybe Customs and Quarantine to verify that. At this point, Madam Chair, I don't know of any confiscations from Customs and Quarantine in regards to this memo. But yeah, if maybe we could get a statement from them stating if they have or have not, but I have not heard of any.
All right, I had not heard of any medication, but I did, I thought here rumor, but not confirmed, and I would like to confirm also of confiscation of PPE and other supplies. And I don't even, I remember one point at Linda DeNorsi denying that also. So okay, and then I did, there was a related issue for this lupus patients on Guam. The Lupus Association had sent us a letter early on in the pandemic saying that the medication, I think it's HCQ, was very hard to obtain. And when I talked to some pharmacists about this, they said they were all running short of this medicine, that the Guam Memorial Hospital had actually obtained all the remaining supply on Guam at one point for use up at the hospital. And so I think that that also happened around the nation, where they were short of hydrochloroquine, and it was in high demand when people believed it was a cure for the COVID, or at least a benefit. But I don't believe that was actually a seizure. I think it was, or even a public health. I don't think public health, when I checked, was not involved in redistributing that those prescriptions at that point. It was really just a high demand at GMH took precedence over high demand from anywhere else, and that's kind of what happened for that shortage. But it's correct. The lupus patients in particular were very concerned about shortage of medicine if it was being seized at anywhere else. I also wanted to point out that, so this power, I think that the public health director had evoked in the guidelines, seems to stem from the public health emergency law. And I guess I just wanted to clarify, for this bill, we are going to make this a policy regardless of emergency or not emergency, or I guess of the sponsor, if you would yield. This is just a discussion between us now. What do you think this has to be made applicable beyond public health emergency?
So, Madam Chair, I do believe that it could be beyond this particular public health emergency. I don't think their conditions are ever going to go away, and these patients are still going to need their prescribed medications or supplies beyond this emergency. Maybe it's not particularly for this, but I also believe that it could apply to other emergencies beyond this COVID-19.
Okay. Thank you. And I note that the bill is very specific as to which items we're excluding from kind of the public health authorities' powers here, right? Okay. So any other colleagues have questions or comments on this bill, beginning with the Minority Leader, Senator Terlaje?
Madam Chair, for the opportunity. Actually, when you were discussing the part of anybody's products were confiscated, I think I've heard some PPEs that were confiscated. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I know one individual is still waiting, but that's the hand sanitizer, and it came from a different, it didn't come from the US. But still up to this day, it is being held hostage somewhat. But I don't think that would it be as terrible as if someone was holding prescription drugs from an individual that receives it online, because it is quite inexpensive to do it online, to order your prescriptions there. And it's actually, we're seeing more and more of it nowadays, online. And I think the question I have here would probably be, what about the certain amount? If a prescription order comes in, if it exceeds a certain amount, I mean, if there's, so I guess I'll ask the author, since we're all in a discussion here. Let's say somebody orders prescription drugs, and sometimes they don't allow you to do it over 30 days. It only allows you, 30 days. Sometimes, depending on the drug itself, a doctor will prescribe for maybe 2 refills, and sometimes 3, but they'll give you 2 months supply. It all depends. So are you looking at to maybe, putting a limit to the amount of drugs being brought in for personal reason at all?
I don't know that there should be, well, there could be a limit. I know that when you go to a specific pharmacy and you show them your prescription, that's all that the pharmacy will give you. I'm not sure what the limitations can be when you order from off island, how much more they can give you based on your prescription that you present to them. So I'm not sure that they can order more than what the prescription is allowing them to get.
Okay.
So I can't really determine what every patient orders. I just imagine that if they took that specific prescription order to a pharmacy, that's all that they're going to give them. So I would imagine that's the same thing if they order it off island as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it'll apply to the same perspective and that would probably include medical devices, equipment and supplies too. That, on another hand, can exceed a certain amount, quite large amount that would could be for resale. I mean, you're saying it's for personal reasons or anything like that. So is there any mechanisms you will have in place on this legislation to ensure that this stays on a private, just for your personal use, not private, but personal use, and not for a business consumption, an area to utilize that?
I'm sure that there's an opportunity to incorporate that into the bill where it could be specifically just for the patient's use alone. I'm sure there's an opportunity for us to amend the bill to incorporate that in there.
Yeah, I think that's the whole perspective of this bill, people utilizing it in their own homes, and getting that type of discount, online. So I do support this, and I'm looking forward to making any kind of changes to make it stronger. And thank you for the opportunity and for introducing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kelly Marsh-Titano, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. I definitely understand the intent of this legislation. We want to, it's been a very scary time, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns happening. And so we want to safeguard what we can and what makes sense. So I had a few questions. I know that there is a notwithstanding provision. I understand that there are going to be other elements that are going to be providing guidance. And so I'd just like to get a little reassurance that some of the questions I had that came through my mind are provided elsewhere in law. But as the speaker before me said, if not, or if there's any situation of non-clarity, then we can put them in here to strengthen it and just to clarify so that everybody understands that those regulations are there. So let's see. If you could define, and I understand, I wish, what I'd really like is to hear from some medical professionals because there are those nuances with the law that we want to be very cognizant of. But do you have at hand with you the definition of lawfully prescribed? I know there are some differences between if a prescription is prescribed here and if it's from off island. If the author could speak to it, and if not, I can put this somewhere where we can find some answers to that.
So your question is a definition of lawfully prescribed. Is that what you're asking?
Right. How that would be used for this particular additional section.
Right. So basically, the federal law says that a lawfully prescribed is a prescription directly from a doctor. So I guess that's how we could define legally prescribed is just a prescription from a doctor.
Okay, and I was really trying to understand the off-island, the on-island. One of my relatives was visiting, and their off-island prescription, though a valid U.S. doctor, could not be prescribed here. And so it doesn't seem like it interferes, but just to bring it up, just to make sure we're all crossing our T's and dotting our I's to make sure it's not holding up any of your good intentions. And perhaps you've already done that, but I just wanted to double check. And I'm glad that there was mention about the federal regulations, because of course, I know it's not your intention to have it conflict with any of that, about certain medicines that can't cross domestic borders and things like that. That would be, my understanding is that would be covered elsewhere in Guam law. Okay, great.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and then is it clear elsewhere in the law that these are medicines that are going to be received, or other items that are received through official healthcare providers only? Are there provisions elsewhere that just help make sure that that part is in order as well?
I'm sorry, Kelly, can you, Senator, can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. So just making sure that the prescriptions, it just seems that all kinds of people like to test boundaries, right? And so your intentions are all the right things, but people like to really push those boundaries. So I'm just making sure that when we're talking about these prescriptions, that whether there needs to be anything that says it's from a valid healthcare provider, some sort of valid pharmacy. And again, maybe it shows up elsewhere in the law and it's already covered federally, it's already covered locally. I just want to make sure that the bill has as strong a language as possible that it needs.
Stand by. Sorry, I just had to press the unmute button. So I just wanted to reiterate, yeah, absolutely. If there is any verbiage that we can include into this particular bill to strengthen it and make sure that people will not take advantage of this opportunity to do anything illegal, absolutely, I'm very much open to including that language into this bill. I do understand that, yes, people are, people can take a lot of things to as far as they can, just like children do, right? You give them an inch and they want a mile, right? So yeah, I'm sure that there is opportunity in any law for people to do that. And if we can incorporate some of the language in here to make it stronger so that people don't have that opportunity, I'm definitely willing to do that.
Right, and like I said, it may actually exist federally, but if we could just double check to make sure that your intentions are also safeguarded,
okay,
along with what you're trying to do.
Absolutely.
And then my last one is just understanding that whether the USPS or other official carriers, when you were saying that you didn't have to, a person wouldn't have to declare to a government of Guam official about their prescriptions. Again, I'm assuming, but perhaps you can clarify if there's already a federal or local process for that, just so that we understand what is coming through the mail.
I do believe that there, if it is coming through the mail and there is question about it, that already Customs and Quarantine already has the opportunity to request for a valid proof that they do have a prescription for it. All this bill really is doing is just allowing them not to confiscate it if they do have if it is a prescribed drug. And I also, the bill doesn't prevent the seizure of any drugs from a pharmacy, only the patient. It's really just specifically from the patient alone. Federal law does not allow importation of prescription drugs from any unlicensed or foreign services anyway.
Okay, very good. So, Therese for allowing me to verify some of those things. And if I have any further questions, we can compile them perhaps and send them to Customs and Quarantine, or they'll be submitting sometime afterwards so that we can read through that. So, Therese, Madam Chair.
Colleagues, and thank you, Senator. I would like to welcome to our hearing discussion here Mr. Tom Nadeau from the Department of Public Health, Division of Environmental Health. So maybe we will all have our questions answered now. Tom, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all the work that you have done throughout this health emergency. And we know, you guys have always had challenges with your staff, limited capacity, but we've asked you to do so much. So, Sidus Maasi from all of us.
Well,
But,
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. First, I apologize. We've been quite busy, as you can imagine. So I wasn't sure if I was able to get on, but I thank you for accommodating me. So with that, half a day chairperson, Therese, Terlaje, and members of the Committee on Health. Oh, by the way, I'm reading the testimony that'll be provided to you by our acting director, Lori Duenas. So thank you. So for members of Committee on Health, Tourism, Historic Preservation, Land, and Justice, my name is Tom Nadeau. I am the Chief Environmental Public Health Officer with the Division of Environmental Health, and for behalf of the Acting Director, Lori Duenas of Department of Public Health and Social Services, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present this testimony on Bill 344-35, an act to add new section 19501.1 to Chapter 19. The Department is opposed to Bill 344-35. If enacted, it can potentially cause great harm to the health of the public during a period of health emergency. As written in Bill 344, it would be unlawful for any official of the government of Guam to seize, confiscate, or order to seize, confiscate, or require any resident recipient to declare any resident's lawfully prescribed drugs, pharmaceutical agents, including but not limited to chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, medical devices, and medical supplies, including but not limited to syringes for the administration of medication, continuous positive airway pressure, otherwise known as CPAP machines, and home dialysis supplies that are imported to Guam via the United States Postal Service or private shipping carrier or agent. Thus, the bill would not only threaten the health and safety of the public, but also prevents our staff from the Division of Environmental Health and our regulatory partners at Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency to perform their duties and responsibilities. The Division of Environmental Health of this department is mandated to regulate the importation, distribution, sale of all drugs, medical devices, cosmetics, and food commodities pursuant to Title 10 GCA Chapter 40, otherwise known as the Guam Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. This law is mirrored after the U.S. Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, which is regulated by and enforced by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, otherwise known as US FDA. The division works closely not only with US FDA, but also with Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency. Stationed at Guam's ports of entry, including the US Postal Service, customs officials screens, if necessary detains on behalf of public health, any and all misbranded and all adulterated consumer commodities that are imported in containers, parcels, and packages. Through this collaborative effort, we are able to prevent harmful drugs, devices, and other commodities from reaching island consumers. Over the years, the department has denied the entries of hundreds of thousands of violated articles, which were eventually destroyed or returned to places of origin, and thus possibly preventing injury, hospitalization, or worse, fatalities to the public. It is uncommon for imported products which meet the local and federal standards to be detained and referred to public health, because our staff at the Environmental Health provides training to new recruits of Customs and Quarantine on the general requirements of the Guam Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, and Customs Agency is quite diligent in identifying compliant and non-compliant imported articles. Although the legislative intent of Bill 344-35 is not provided in the bill, the department presumes that this is a result of the seizures of numerous COVID-related articles at Guam's ports of entry by Customs through the instruction of public health. If so, we'd like to share some data about import detentions that have occurred since the beginning of the COVID-19 emergency. From March 19, 2020 to June 29, 2020, 55 importations of various consumer commodities were retained by Customs and referred to public health. Of the 55 total detentions, 29,203 articles were medical devices, 194,000 were drugs for a total of over 223,000 pieces of detained articles. Every single detention was valid and justified, and all of them were unapproved products that could not be released. It's important to further note that during this period, not a single lawfully prescribed drug, pharmaceutical agent, including chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, approved medical devices, including any syringes for administration for medication, CPAP machines, or any home dialysis supplies were detained and referred to public health. As previously noted, Customs officials are able to differentiate approved and non-approved public health regulated consumer products, and they routinely contact public health whenever a questionable item is observed at ports of entry. Department questions the intent and need for Bill 344-35. We can agree that in April 2020, during the height of the COVID-19 emergency, that mandatory customs and quarantine regarding the importation of items related to COVID-19 doctrine was used in an effort to ration supplies for the purpose of responding to public health emergency, as well to prevent the importation of counterfeit items. At that time, the department learned that there were unapproved US FDA commodities that were entering Guam's borders. Despite public misconception, at no time did the department ever confiscate any of these products declared under declaration for distribution and use by any government of Guam, department or agency, private clinic, or hospital. The need for declaring all imported commodities not just a requirement confined to the Emergency Health Powers Act of Bill 344-35, but is a requirement for all imported goods at customs declaration for entry by other means, by like passenger on plane or parcels that entries are ports of entry. Declaring commodities is a must to ensure such entries are traceable and can be identified if the need for additional security screening is necessary. This action is a safety mechanism to protect our borders from introduction of unapproved and thus illegal drugs and medical devices. Bill 344 intends to make this vital requirement in legal act for any government and Guam official, such as public health staff, customs agency personnel, and even Guam Police Department. This is not sound judgment, in our opinion, and has potential to cause adverse harm to our public. Furthermore, the department questions the meaning of the language lawfully prescribed. Is this reference to Guam's law? Is the law referring to the federal government or other laws of foreign countries? Please be informed that the department has observed numerous detentions from inbound passengers and island businesses attempting to import foreign products which may be lawful in that country of origin, but routinely determined to be unapproved in Guam and the United States. These prescription drugs, such as antibiotics and pharmaceutical controlled substances, can be abused and misused. This is particularly true for pharmaceutical controlled drugs, such as narcotics, as demonstrated by our current national crisis of drug abuse and death. Also, many commodities manufactured in foreign countries are subject to that country's regulations, not necessarily manufactured for export, sale, and importation for distribution in the United States, including Guam. Thus, such products are not approved and should be screened for detention in order to protect our community. For these reasons, the department cannot support Bill 344-35. We strongly believe that this bill has the potential to do more harm than good for people of Guam. In fact, we encourage just the opposite. There should be legislation that strengthens ours and customs' ability to prevent the importation of misbranded and adulterated consumer commodities. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to provide this testimony. Thank you. This is on behalf of Lori Duenas, our acting director. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nadeau, and thank you to the director of the department. And I'm going to begin the questions with Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the author of the measure and the comments on the bill, but I have no questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Taitakui, did you have any follow-ups?
No, Madam Chair, I just want to, I'm looking forward to Tom's testimony so we can read it thoroughly to find out the areas which are concerning for public health and perspective. So other than that, I'll just look forward to his testimony to dissect it and give you a call, Tom. Okay.
All right, thank you, Senator. Senator Kelly Marsh-Taitano.
Just Masi, Madam Chair, and it was good to hear that testimony because some of the questions that I had, things that aren't within my typical field were answered there, and I too want to be able to read this more thoroughly so that, you know, I understand how it's applying to the questions that I had. One of them being that lawfully prescribed, whether we are talking about the federal, local, or foreign. And it is true, we're at a crossroads here. So perhaps in some ways, maybe even more so than elsewhere, we just want to be real strong in our language or close up any gaps because we do have so many that come from elsewhere and they do have different medicinal traditions and things like that. So I appreciate the testimony and Sejus Maasi for letting me make a few comments and see if I still had some questions that I could ask of public health.
Right, thank you, Senator. And I have no questions. So Senator Muña, if you would like to ask questions and close, I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you again, Mr. Nadeau, for being here on this Zoom public hearing and providing testimony on behalf of Department of Public Health and Social Services and offering some answers to some of the questions. So I believe that the memo, when the memo came out, the one that I read in my opening statement, it was very broad. And I think it's really easy to misunderstand what you mean, what it meant by confiscation. And I've had several calls to my office about the concerns about patients who do get their prescriptions on mail order, and they wondered if their prescriptions were going to be confiscated by Department of Public Health and Social Services through the Customs Agency based on that memo alone. So it really was out of fear and concern that if they weren't able to get their prescriptions, that their health may be jeopardized because of the pandemic. So this bill really had very good intentions, and it really was to protect the patients who really are afraid to get out of their home, and the only opportunity that they can have to get these prescriptions or any of their supplies is through ordering it through the mail. So it really wasn't in no way allowing for illegal activity. And if there is an opportunity for us to make it so strong that can't happen with this position, this bill, I'm definitely open to discussing that with Department of Public Health and Customs and Quarantine and even everyone in the committee. So again, it wasn't an opportunity for people to, like Senator Marsh Taitano said, to find those boundaries and try to go beyond it. It really was specifically to protect the patients who do rely on mail orders for their prescriptions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Anyone else want? If not, we're going to, there's no other testimony on this bill, so I'm going to conclude the hearing on bill number 344-35. We will follow up with Customs if they have any testimony. The time is now 2:40 p.m. and we will consider Bill 344-35 duly heard. Thank you again, Mr. Nadeau. We'll now begin the second item on our agenda, which is Bill number 338-35. I will invite the sponsor, Senator James Moylan, to please introduce the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bill 338-35 is an act to add subsection 19403D, subsection 19508, and subsection 19608D, and to amend subsection 19404, all of Chapter 19, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, and it's relative to enhancing transparency during a state of public health emergency. So Bill 338-35, which mandates that the administration provide reports for actions associated with procurement, hiring, expenditures, and seizing of properties associated with a state of public health emergency. Chapter 19 of Title 10 Guam Code Annotated. It provides the Governor of Guam unprecedented authority and emergency health powers, which in many cases bypasses several other local statutes. The chapter presently does not require the executive branch to provide reports or updates to the legislative branch, hence the public. So Bill 338-35 requires that the administration provide a report to the Guam legislature within 10 days after any actions are pursued in association with procurement, expenditures, hiring, or even if the government seizes someone's property during declaration. So likewise, for any actions pursued from the day that the declaration was signed till the effective date of this act, the administration would have up to 7 days to provide an update to the legislative branch. A cumulative report would also be required for submittal 30 days after the termination of the declaration. Thank you, Madam Chair. and I look forward to the testimonies.
Thank you very much, Senator Moylan. We have signed up to testify. Mr. Troy Torres, you may start off.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Buenas, good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and Senators, and thanks for this opportunity to testify. I will be much more courteous and respectful to the legislature than I was the last time I testified before the Guam legislature. Thanks for the smiles. I'm testifying in support of Bill 338, and I just have some comments and maybe even suggestions for improvement to the bill. Each of the sections that talks about a report, I don't have an issue with the number of days, but I think the word report needs to be defined. And just based on my experience working in an administration and understanding how the bureaucrats in management positions at places like DOA, Revenue Tax, BBMR especially, there's this natural hesitation among financial people, especially accountants, to not want to share information. It's just that I don't know it's just some sort of culture that in my experience has existed there. And so if you tell them to write you a report, but you don't say what that report should be, they're going to give you a one-liner that says, here's our report that says basically nothing, as little as possible. And so I think the word report just needs to be, it needs to be defined. Secondly, and I'm not sure how far a bill according to your rules can be changed or expanded, but at the very least, the procurement portion of this bill, the mandating of reports for procurement, I think a whole lot can already be done to improve transparency if the legislature amends this Emergency Health Powers Act to mandate, or just put it right in there as a matter of law, that no procurement can be done without, at the very least, 3 price quotes. And because I think we've seen with at least the hotels, the governor, I guess, in her office thought that they had the authority, the legislature's emergency health powers mandate provided such latitude that they could go ahead and conduct this procurement without even price quotes. And for the hotels, there was hardly a procurement record, and where the legislature elsewhere has mandated that there be some sort of procurement record that has, and the legislature's already put this in law. There needs to be a log of the procurement record. There needs to be minutes of meetings that happen from this procurement, et cetera. So there are a whole lot of documents that already are required by the legislature. If 3 price quotes was a requirement, and then you might not have to require these agencies to produce an additional report. It would just be the production of information to people who ask within a reasonable time frame. And I don't know how far we can go with expanding this bill, or if this is the discussion for another bill. I'm not sure, but I think the legislature also needs to get rid of the governor's ability to suspend statutes during an emergency health declaration. I'm not a lawyer. It just seems unconstitutional, not democratic, that the governor be given such broad powers. And also, of course, it leads to situations where the administration having all of that power and using all that power in such a small amount of time, it's not going to be transparent. People are not going to know what's happening, especially if the governor is able to suspend the Open Government Act or the Freedom of Information Act, or, God forbid, something more important, some laws that are even more important to people. And to that end, I think if there's anything that needs some improvement in this bill as far as definitions for what reports should be made, it would be the section on reporting whenever the governor seizes or uses private property. I think that's all around, that's just such a big concern that, a governor, one person could have so much power to dispose of people's property, and information like that should just be readily available. I would even suggest shortening that time frame for the production of whatever report that would be. I'm very sorry, I don't have specific suggestions for how to improve this language. I'm not a bill writer or anything like that, but those are my suggestions. And of course, I'm sorry, the last thing would be to include penalties for non-compliance. And that's all. Thank you, Senators and Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Torres. It's quite a unique opportunity for us to be hosting you on our site. But all right. We will hear now from Dominic Hernandez. Mr. Hernandez, could you just adjust yourself so that your picture is you're clear? Yeah, it's kind of.
Is that better, ma'am?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, senators, for the opportunity. I just want to state that I am in support of Bill 338-35 on transparency. And I just wanted to start my statement off with a quote from the CIA stating, one person's statement is an opinion, multiple opinions is intelligence. Fiduciary duty is an ethical code that any government official should uphold to the highest standard. The fact that we are sitting here discussing ways for our government, and more in particular our governor, to be transparent during a public health emergency tends to question this ethical code. The public deserves the right to have reports. They deserve the right to ask the 5 Ws, and they deserve the right to know where our tax-paying funds or federal funds are being used in detailed reports. It is not a matter of if an individual wants to do it, because it relates to moral and ethical understandings. During the crisis, the procurement of hotels for quarantine sites were without a doubt questioned. I believe if the government had been more transparent from the beginning on all the details to the matter, no one would be questioning the issue. A question I often ask about the procurements for the sites is, were all the hotels on island in fact contacted for a possible contract to quarantine those that needed it? I remember online there was a few hotels who offered great rates and discounts during New Year's Day. One in particular I remember was Bayview, that was offering a rate of $90 per night to stay at the hotel. If they had offered a rate of $90 per night back in January, I often ask why weren't they considered as an option for the quarantine site based upon the amounts the contract had stated at $100 per night. Last I checked, the contract was $100 per night, and I did a quick Google search as well, and for Guam within today's economic situation on hotel rates. And I came across 5 of them. There was more, but I listed 5 down that were right around the range of the $100 per night or lower. Guam Plaza was at $101 per night. Holiday Resort was $70 per night. Maina Airport Plaza was $72. Tumuning Plaza Hotel was $45 per night. I understand that Google searching and getting a contract, there's a lot more details and other stuff that needs to be checked into. But this was just a simple Google search that I just found and wanted to put out there as information, as an example of a way to be more transparent, so that people know that at least the research and contacting the hotels was done. And I believe this is why transparency is important. I feel that if at the beginning the government had came out and stated and listed all the hotels, GMs that were contacted about possible contracts for quarantine sites, if they had shown who'd responded to the request and the amounts offered, I believe the public would probably have more belief and trust within the decisions of why the hotels in particular were chosen. The most profound argument, I believe, though, on why we should ensure proper measures are in place for transparency during a public emergency is to just simply listen to public opinion. I cannot count how many comments online from different social media sites, news company Facebook pages, to even include my own Facebook page of the public clearly stating they don't trust the government. This is a serious concern that should not be taken lightly. They don't trust the government because of a lot of issues. I'll give one example is like unemployment. How many times they were told soon or next week for unemployment benefits. And here we are today. As of today, I believe $78.3 million were released out of the initial 275. And the question that's often asked is from the public is what's the holdup as far as releasing all the funds for all those that were error free? And when I went to the Department of Labor's website for Facebook, anyways, dated on June 12, 2020, they stated that 16,396 applications were submitted with 9,068 applications with unresolved issues, which would mean that at least 7,328 were error-free applications. By requiring transparency within a 10-day window to report to the public on what's going on, the trust for the public will begin to be restored. The stress of figuring out how long people will have to wait would be reduced. Payment plans for the companies who are about ready to disconnect a lot of people come July can have a better idea of how long to wait before disconnecting people. June 12th was the last post I saw updated on DOL's Facebook page about how many applications had been received and how many were error-free. And I wrote this testimony on June 26th. That was roughly 2 weeks since their last update on data on their official Facebook page for everybody to read and share. So I don't necessarily blame the public for having distrust toward our government when simple issues like these that could get resolved in a matter of hours is being conducted. I completely agree with upholding the government to a 10-day window period to report all issues that need transparency, such as taxpayers' funds being used. However, I cannot stress how important it is that we require in full details the 5 Ws with the reports. And these reports should be released to the public via social media, government websites, or other platforms for public viewing purposes. The public should not have to do a Freedom of Information Act on all matters that without a doubt relate to the public itself. I do feel ashamed at the fact that our government thinks that not being completely transparent or upholding to their fiduciary duties we elected them to do is normal, because I believe that's abnormal. In fact, we're sitting here now discussing the issue of transparency. I won't deny it kind of blows my mind, because I believe fiduciary duty is an ethical code that all government officials should uphold and honor. And by us sitting here discussing about transparency shows that there are many issues going on. However, since the focus is on transparency, I would like to just end my testimony with a quote, again from the CIA, stating one person's statement is an opinion, multiple opinions is intelligence. So the more information the government puts out there, especially in relations to procurements, how it was done, who they contacted, and the amounts that are being set aside for the procurements, I think would definitely help out as far as having trust with the public again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hernandez, for your testimony. If you can wait for a while, we'll have questions after this last person testifying. So I'll now invite Ms. Michelle Armenta to testify.
Hello, everyone. How are you? My name is Michelle Armenta, and I am the former president of the Vigilance Committee, a nonprofit organization dedicated to requiring compliance with the Open Government Law and the Sunshine Reform Act by public officials and government representatives, and promoting ways to improve the dissemination and disclosure of information to the general public. I appear before this committee in support of Bill 338-35 and to promote enhancing openness and transparency of our government so that our citizens remain informed about what their government is doing. During these COVID-19 pandemic times, I have witnessed the rights of the people of Guam trampled upon by our elected officials who have asserted their alleged authority, pursuant to Chapter 19 of Title 10 of the Government Code, to shred the open government law and thereby sabotage not only the people's right to know, but one of the few ways in which the people are able to hold their government accountable. Compliance with the open government law must never be considered as mere bureaucracy. While I support Bill 338-35, I respectfully recommend to the committee the following amendment to statutory language to restore transparency of government to the people of Guam. Under 10 GCA Section 19403 Alpha 1, through an executive order, suspend the provisions of any regulatory statute, except 5, Chapter 8 and 10, the Open Government Law and the Sunshine Law, respectively, provided that the executive directors, by whatever title, enforce social distancing during meetings, of prescribing procedures for conducting local businesses or the orders, rules, and regulations of any government of Guam agency, to the extent that strict compliance with the same would prevent, hinder, or delay necessary action, including emergency purchases by the Public Health Authority to respond to the public health emergency, or increase the health threat to the population. The recommended statutory language not only safeguards the Open Government Law, it also reaches the Sunshine Law, which must also be seen as at risk, given the cavalier way in which elected officials disposed of the Open Government Law. Additionally, I recommend that reasonable statutory language be added to hold those who violate reporting under this statute accountable. I want to thank you again for allowing me to testify before the committee, and I look forward to the final version of the proposed measure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Armenta. And I'm glad to meet you here for your work with the Vigilance Committee. I admire that work that you were doing with that, or that the committee does. I want to recognize the presence of Senator Sabina Perez also. And we will now, maybe we'll begin with the, let me get rid of some of mine. We get a legal review on a preliminary review of the bill, just suggesting that when we say we want reports from actions between the declaration of the emergency until enactment of this act, they're recommending we clarify that language because there may have been other emergencies prior to the one we're in right now. And just to clarify that the timing of that language. And for now, that was the only issue brought up. We did also ask Public Health to testify. Have received no testimony from Public Health at this time. BBMR has said that this, actually no, we've received no fiscal note from BBMR on this bill. All right, so for questions for the panel, we'll start with the sponsor, Mr. Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the input, and I have no questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Senator Kelly Marsh-Titano.
Sidus Masi, Madam Chair, and to everybody who takes the time to testify. I usually point that out because I know it takes time, it takes effort. We've got multiple layers to get in there, and everybody who's here has put in that time to go through all those multiple layers and those checks, and has really been thoughtful about the legislation that's before us. So I appreciate all of that. That's the whole intent of having public hearings. So what stood out to me the most is, and I'm trying to figure out, I guess, where would be the best place to hear, but I think even before I ask for the information about whether 10 days or 7 days is reasonable, because I really agree with the language that it needs to be written in such a way that we want the transparency, we want accountability, but we also don't want to slow down or actually hamper the process if there's a crisis going on. And so figuring out how to balance those two concerns is going to be really important. And I think that that will be figuring out what we mean by reporting, and some of the other language that's there, such as if we're starting from March 13th and what kind of reporting we're going to be asking for. That's a pretty long period of time by now. Is 7 days going to be feasible? And we want to make sure that it doesn't hamper our responses. So I'm looking for some clarity in those. Hopefully the author will continue working on this and create that kind of clarity that will help us all be able to understand the bill a bit better. But Sijis Masi, Madam Chair, for allowing me to make those comments and hope for a little bit of clarity for the bill.
Thank you, Senator. Minority Leader, Senator Taitakui.
Sijus Masi, Madam Chair. Half day, everybody. Hello, Troy. It's always a great pleasure to hear what you have to say on certain measures like this, especially with your wealth of experience and understanding, you know, how an administration would work when they are trying not to give you all that information. But there are ways to look into it. Yeah, you and I both know there are certain alleys you can go down and get that information. FOIA, of course, is one of them, but you know how long that takes. I think that's more a diversion more than anything than providing information on FOIA. I think we need to look into the FOIA laws and maybe strengthen it in some way. And that leads me to you, Michelle. I'm so happy to finally meet with you and being here. Of course, I'm a great fan of yours as well as Senator Terlaje's. Reading all your reports that are coming out and your opinions, most especially. I'm hoping that we can look into the FOIA law and the Sunshine Act law and trying to find ways to mend those holes that they're finding ways to dig themselves out of and not provide us the information we need. In this bill in particular, Dominic, I really appreciate it. And by the way, Troy, sorry, I didn't want to leave Troy too soon. I wanted to ask you if you could please submit in writing, Troy, your testimony and anything else that you can think of. I know once you get your mind into it and start typing away, you come up with new things. So that would be very helpful as we move forward on this legislation to incorporate. So if you can submit that testimony. And I appreciate Dominic also meeting you for the first time, Mr. Hernandez, providing your testimony. A lot of things in here, good questions in there. You talked about the $100 versus the $98 stay and all these places that you've brought up. Yeah, it's really good research, by the way. I just wanted to commend you for all the research that you've done. But in the legislation, going back into the legislation, I was thinking, should there be, should the bill consider including administrative penalties for noncompliance? I think we should incorporate something like that. You know, that would place it in there. And then also, should we also make it clear that the reporting requirements include receipts and expenditures of federal funds issued to Guam, specifically to assist public health emergencies? So that might be something considered to the author of the legislation to incorporate that, because, you know, we're dealing with almost $1 billion worth of funds coming from the federal government. And we need to follow suit on that as well. So I appreciate everyone's testimony, and for the first time meeting yourselves, Michelle and Dominic, appreciate you taking the time out and to provide your opinion and your insight, and most especially all the research that you've done. It takes a lot of work. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. And I hope my questions with administrative penalties as well as federal funds could be incorporated into the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Taitakui. Senator Luis Muñoz.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions, but I do agree and thank Troy Torres and Dominic Hernandez and Michelle Armenta for testifying. And that's exactly why we're here, is so that we can hear from the public and all the constituents that were affected by this. I do believe that there is a lack of trust with this current administration now because of the lack of information that's being provided. And we probably wouldn't have to go through this and have to introduce this bill if the people felt comfortable with the information that they were receiving. Obviously, they're not, because we're sitting here and we're all discussing about this. So I do agree and I do support this bill, and I thank the author for doing it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Senator Muñoz. Senator Perez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to thank everyone who testified here today. And I'm in support of adding in language about what rules are being suspended. I think that's very important. It's not, yeah, that's something that I'm also working on my end. I do want to introduce some bills regarding closing the gaps when it comes to the Emergency Health Powers Act. So I do appreciate the testimony that was brought forward today. And I'm looking forward to your testimony as well when those bills come out. So I just want to make a comment about that. So thank you. Therese Masi.
Thank you. If I could just comment also on the bill from my own personal view. I agree with some of the recommendations made that there are some laws that we might want to reconsider whether those should be allowed to be waived during an emergency, and or whether there are some laws that are so sacred to us that we don't want them waived, regardless of an emergency, or we make special rules for emergencies so that some kind of version of those laws actually, still include the protections for the public. And I very much agree with the testimony regarding trust, and that trust, you just can't you can't oversell it. You can't overestimate how important it is. I think you're very right on in saying that it is crucial. It really is crucial. And I think it's most crucial during emergencies. What we really want to be able to do, and, for the most part, our success is going to lie on whether we can trust that that all government officials are acting for our benefit without any type of personal gain, right? We want that at all times, but during an emergency, because things happen fast, that's why trust is very important. So I'm looking forward to any other bills that might be beyond the scope of this particular bill, but I do support requesting for that reports be given. I think there's some words that might need a little bit more definition. For example, we've got actions, the word actions, right? So we're requiring them by this bill to report all actions, yet those are, and then there's another part that says being pursued. So even prior to completion, it seems to be requiring reporting, and that might be difficult. I know that, procurements we have specific rules as to what are reportable during procurement, but for all other actions, we really don't. So I just think that might be one of the words. And then, of course, the other one was a suggestion made by one of those testifying as to the word report, that report. I've seen the same thing myself, where if you just tell somebody to report in the government, yeah, you're not going to get the information you really want unless you specify it. And I've seen legislatures do this over and over. I've helped them try to write this, and they still find loopholes. So it's a very difficult thing to tie somebody down as to what information they're going to provide, because you can describe information differently, or they will conclude that it's not that, it's this, unless we write bills that are 100 pages long with definitions like the federal government does. And, it's really, that's the game, I guess, sometimes. But so I appreciate that type of testimony. We tried this, of course, in Bill 333, and when we overrode Bill 333, part of that bill was to require an audit by OPA. It was also to require monthly reporting of expenditures within 20 days. So we gave even a little more time. But that was only for expenditures. So this bill would expand to not just expenditures, but to other actions as well, as the sponsor indicated. So I think it expands that accountability and transparency requirement. Other than that, yeah, as I said, I support the bill. I hope we can finesse whatever we need to finesse in here, but otherwise, yeah, it is. I think reporting on any action by the government, it doesn't impair the government's ability to act. It doesn't impair the government's ability to act swiftly in an emergency. It creates paperwork, but unfortunately, that's how I think we build trust in the government. We have to have a paper trail, and we have to have that available for inspection. Those two things go together, and that's the key. So anyways, I want to thank the sponsor for the bill, and I want to thank all of you for testifying. I very much appreciate it. Looks like Senator Taitakui has another comment and question, Senator.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. I just wanted to ask, thinking of time framing on the reporting side, and if I can maybe ask Therese, since you have had much experience on that, what is your opinion on time frame for reporting?
So I've thanks for the question. So I've been involved in several emergencies in the past, and probably the one that had the quickest response time, the most urgent response time were the North Korea ones, where Kim Jong-un was going crazy on Guam. My experience in this sort of thing is that you do not need 10 days to get information out, and it will not overwhelm government systems to require the quick reporting of information that is ready information, that is not draft information, and you're not working with on a daily basis. You're not working with documents that are 200 pages or 1,000 pages long that requires such tedious work in redacting non-public information or things like that. And as a matter of fact, if you got information out regularly on a daily basis at the end of your shift during an activation. So what I was in charge of during these emergencies, I was called a Joint Information Coordinator, basically the person in charge of the Joint Information Center, and simultaneously I was on the governor's command staff. So, we saw the information that was coming out, and there was an entire section that handled procurement. And in this case, it's not just procurement. In this bill, it's not just procurement we're talking about, but basically all levels of public information that would come out of an emergency, right? And take for an example, when an emergency starts, one of the first things that goes out right after the composition of the executive order declaring whatever needs to be declared is, I think this is going to sound trite, but it's true. One of the first things that goes out is the open purchase order that exists between Office of Civil Defense and whatever grocery store it is. And normally it's like Payless, right? Especially when it was in Agana. And the staff would take the open PO, go to Agana Payless, get $500 worth of food to bring back to cook for the people who would be at Civil Defense over the next few days. But the receipt that would be brought back and the whatever documents go into the use of that PO or getting the PO to using the PO, it's just created within minutes, and information like that can be uploaded online or sent to the legislature, whatever the case may be, on a daily basis at the end of the responsible person's shift. It's not a very difficult thing to do. So I think the legislature is being very generous with 10 days. Senator Terlaje, I know you were talking about 20 days after the close of a month. I thought that was extremely generous of the legislature to the administration. And if the administration says, if anyone, because I've heard this before, especially from the financial agencies, if anyone from the governor's office or any of the financial agencies tell you that this is creating, more work, the only way it creates more work for anyone is if they're actively trying to hide the information. Because if you were actively trying to disclose the information, it is actually very easy to do. That's all. Do you have any other questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with that, Troy, that reporting of expenditures is a quite simple thing because you have to cut a check to expend it or a purchase order or something. There's a document already that exists that you could simply forward. That's your report. However, this bill nor Bill 333 requires an analysis or anything like that of those expenditures or whether they followed the law. Nothing. It just a strict reporting of what actually, things that happened. So I know when we asked for the reports pursuant to Bill 333, we gave them a generous time frame, like you said, but we still have not received those reports. I know that after that, the governor said she was going to post things online or FOIA requests online, and that there would be other information posted online. So I'm sure if we run around to all the different sites that we can find a lot of the information. I'm hoping, but I haven't actually done that. I'm still hoping they're going to submit a report and that it would be concise, grouping of the information that's relevant for us. And we had asked only for expenditures, really, COVID related. I was surprised, that some of the controversial procurements that were in the news, we found out that there wasn't a procurement record, that they were kind of reconstructing that afterward. That was shocking to me. And it was also very shocking that to find out that the theory was we had waived the procurement law, and despite the existence of the emergency procurement law, that we had waived even that. I've just never seen that done before, and it's still very shocking to me. And so that's one of the things I agree with the senators and you testifying who have said that there are certain laws that we need to have a double look at, and whether those really need to be waived during an emergency. Anyway, Senator Moylan, I'll have you as a sponsor. You may close on the bill. You have some closing remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you to our speakers today, Mr. Torres, Ms. Armenta, and Mr. Hernandez. All your testimony was well received, I believe, and it all helps to strengthen our bills. As you can hear from the senators, we're happy, very happy for your testimony, and you gave great input. And I think if you pay attention to our legislature calendar, you should continue to give inputs on the different bills you see, because you obviously have some good insights. So thank you very much. We're going to take this bill and take your inputs back to our committee and strengthen the bill and hopefully get it out of committee, and so we can get it to session floor for a vote. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again to those who testified and to the panel. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Moylan, and for all of you who have testified today. There being no further testimony or individuals to present testimony, the committee will continue to accept testimony until Tuesday, July 14. And you may submit those testimonies to the mailroom at the Guam Legislature in the Guam Congress Building or through email to senatorterlajeguam@gmail.com. This public hearing is now adjourned. It is 3:20 p.m. Si Dios masi to all. Thank you.